Hello everyone, this is 8-Bit Flashback, and today I'm reviewing the X16 handheld video game system that's capable of emulating all kinds of different systems, such as Game Boy, Nintendo, arcade, and more. So this is the X16 handheld portable video game system, and it has approximately 110 built-in games from various different systems, such as the Game Boy Advance, NES, and arcade games from Neo-Geo and CPS 1 and 2. But this is capable of playing other systems as well, like PlayStation, but the emulation for PlayStation is not so good. But to be fair, in the advertisement, it only mentions support for Game Boy Advance and NES, and I did get mine from a site called TomTop.com, and they're priced right around $49. So after testing and playing multiple different systems, I found that Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, NES, Neo-Geo, CSP 1 and 2 have the best emulation, and I'll go over that in more detail here in just a few. So this has a giant 7-inch screen with 8 GB of internal memory, and you can add more games to this thing via a micro SD card up to 32 GB. It does have a directional pad along with A, B, X, and Y buttons, but it also has thumbsticks on both sides. But for that D-pad, I would say it's not traditional, it's more like what you'd find on a Nintendo Switch Joy-Con. There's also a select and start and shoulder buttons on the top. Also located on the top is going to be your volume control. You got your plus and minus. You also got a power input so you can charge this thing with a micro USB cable. You got your headphone jack or TV out, and then you got your back button and power button. Then located on the back here is going to be your camera and speaker. As far as the cosmetic construction goes, it feels pretty lightweight when you're holding it, but as far as the buttons and how they feel and all that, it feels okay. It doesn't feel super cheap. And it has a nice rubber coating on it, so it's easy to grip. And for the sound quality, it's actually pretty decent. I wouldn't say it's amazing, but it's not bad. I think it sounds fairly clear for this not being a high-end device. So let's compare this next to some other handhelds. Here's the Nintendo Switch, and this is actually just a little bit bigger than the Switch, so this thing is pretty big. And here it is next to an original PSP and a PSP clone. And that clone is pretty much an earlier version of what I have now. And the software on that Blue Mars PSP clone was very similar, although it did not play arcade games such as Neo-Geo or CPS 1. And this is what the main menu looks like when you power this up, and we have 30 built-in games that's going to be located on that main menu, with a mixture of Game Boy Advance, Nintendo, and arcade games. There's also an additional 80 games that's inside that internal memory, and we'll cover that here in just a few. And most of these built-in games seem to play fairly well. Now let's check out some of the other features on here. If we head down to the bottom left corner and click on themes, that'll change the background and give it a different looking appearance. If we go over to games, that's going to give us access to the internal memory games and the external memory games, which is going to be on that micro SD card. So this is the additional 80 games I was talking about earlier, and this is going to be located inside that internal memory. And this is going to be a mixture of arcade games for Neo-Geo and CPS games. At first, I got excited when I accessed the internal memory, and I noticed that off to the left here it said I had 8,000 games. But that's actually inaccurate. There's only 80 games, and for some reason these games just keep repeating themselves. So once you get to 80 games, the list just starts to repeat itself. There's also a built-in movie player so you can watch MP4 movies. Here's a quick sample, and this seems to be some sort of weird commercial. There's also a music player, a camera, an ebook reader, a dictionary, some tools that consist of a stopwatch, a recorder, a calculator, and a calendar. There's also a file browser so you can browse the contents of the internal memory and the micro SD card. And last one on the bottom is going to be settings, and inside here we can change the display brightness. We can also change the power saving settings, the date and time, the language, the TV out settings, and more. Okay, it's time for some emulation tests, and I'm going to try and go in order from the best emulation to the not so good emulation. So I'm going to start with the Game Boy Color first, and so far I haven't noticed much issues. It sounds good, looks good, and I don't see any screen tearing going on, and there doesn't seem to be any noticeable lag. It seems to be working well. Now keep in mind, this is not a high-end device, so even though the emulation is decent, it could still be better, and the same goes for every other emulator on here. The big value in this device is the ability to add more games via a micro SD card. That's the breaking point where I think this device becomes worth it. And here I'm testing an original Game Boy game, and I would say the emulation is pretty much the same as the Game Boy Color. Now obviously I haven't had a chance to test all the games. I'm sure there's going to be a few games out there that are going to have issues, but for all the games I did check out, they seem to work fine. Here's Super Mario Bros. 2 for the original Nintendo, and I would say the emulation is very close to being the same as Game Boy Color and Game Boy. In fact, I would say it's probably a three-way tie for these first three that I'm testing. Now I did notice when I was testing out some Nintendo games, some of the games were running a little bit faster than others, but this was corrected just by finding a different version of the ROM. Say I had a Japan ROM, then I find a US ROM, then it seems to play at the right speed, or vice versa. So I'm not really sure what's going on with that. And if you're looking to change the screen ratio, you do have the ability to do that, so that's a nice feature. Notice right here I'm playing in full screen, but if I push the back button on the top here, that's going to open up an in-game menu. And if we scroll down to settings, we're going to be able to change that screen size. And we got three different choices. We got scale, which is what I'm going to choose. There's also full screen, which is going to get rid of the black bars on the side. And there's also original, which I don't recommend because for some reason it just makes the screen really, really small. And here's a test with the turtles on the Game Boy Advance, and I would say the emulation is doing fairly well for the most part, but there does seem to be one issue. The sound seems to be about a quarter second behind. As far as the controls go though, there doesn't seem to be any lag there, it just seems to be an issue with the sound. And this is a CPS arcade game, this is Final Fight, and the emulation seems to be doing a pretty good job. Now I have noticed with some games there does seem to be some slowdown, and some of the games might even run faster, but overall I would say that most of the games seem to play fairly decent. And I have noticed that there's just some games that are not compatible. If you're looking to save a game, there is a nice save state feature. If you push that back button, you can access the menu, and then go ahead and save a game. And there's going to be up to 5 different slots that you can pick to save a game. And then whenever you want to go back to that save spot, you just open up the game and load the progress. And here's another arcade game. This is Metal Slug for the Neo-Geo. And I would say that Neo-Geo games pretty much have the same performance as CPS games. Most of the games seem to play fairly well, but there is some games that are not compatible. And this is a test with a Super Nintendo game. This is Super Mario World. And as you can hear in the sound, it does seem to be running just a little bit slow. But at times it actually speeds up, so it's not consistent. And I tried a handful of games out, and they all had a similar performance. And here's Sonic the Hedgehog 3 for the Sega Genesis, and it seems to be performing about the same as the Super Nintendo emulator. So to summarize the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo emulation, I would say it's not so good. There are some games that are playable, but overall, it's not a great experience. Okay, last on the list for testing today is PlayStation. Now, I was really surprised that PlayStation could even play at all on this system. I wasn't expecting that. I haven't seen any reviews with anyone covering PlayStation working for this system. So even though some games work, it's very choppy with a very low frame rate, making it almost unplayable. But with that being said, I'm still very impressed that it's working at all. So let's go ahead and test out another game for PlayStation. This is Crash Bandicoot, and it pretty much has the same performance. Now I did notice some of the less demanding games like Grand Theft Auto seem to run just a little bit better. So overall, there is a decent amount of systems and games that play well, and I'm able to have plenty of fun while playing. Okay, it's time for me to go. If you like that video, click that like button. If you want to hear more from me, please subscribe. And if you want to help support the channel, you can find me on Facebook and Patreon. Have yourself a great day, and I'll see you next time.